Thanks very much, Duncan and John Larkindale. I think the New Zealand High Commissioner is here. Where are you, John? There you go. Air Chief Marshal Angus Houston, Chief of Defence Force, Michael L'Estrange, the Director of the National Security College, Duncan Lewis, the National Security Advisor, Professor Peter Anderson, the Director of Policing, Intelligence and Counterterrorism, Chief Commissioner Simon Overland. Where's Simon? Good to have you here. I hope you've got your visa in order, being over here in the ACT from Victoria. And also, the Police Commissioner of South Australia, Mal Hyde, is here as well, I understand. So welcome to you as well. Those of you who come from the states and territories, thank you for making the journey to Canberra in winter. We understand how arduous this can be, but your contribution to this event is important. And for those of you who are members of the SES from across the Australian Public Service, and what we now call the national security community, welcome to you as well, because this is an important gathering of the community. Duncan mentioned before the flight into Kandahar. He's absolutely right. We did have that conversation, the CDF, Duncan, myself. In fact, I would have talked about anything other than landing at Kandahar at that time on a C-130. So if that's where this began, that's terrific. But I'm glad we landed in one piece. On a day like this, though, as Duncan mentions that, let's always bear in mind our fellow Australians who are serving in the front line in Afghanistan. We only tend to focus on that debate publicly when things go wrong or when tragedy strikes. Let's bear in mind we have so many Australians out there in the field today doing a job in Australia's name, and we are proud of each and every one of them. I'm pleased to be here today speaking to a joint audience of the National Security College and the second meeting of the National Security Senior Leadership Forum. I spoke to the first National Security Leadership Forum in September last year, and I opened the National Security College here in Canberra just last month. Both initiatives I thoroughly support. Both are essential to building a cooperative and cohesive national security community and culture here in Australia. In December 2008, I delivered the first ever national security statement by an Australian Prime Minister to the Australian Parliament. In that statement, I outlined the increasingly complex, fast-moving and interconnected nature of our national security environment. And I outlined the need for a new, more agile and better integrated and coordinated approach to national security to face up to the reality of a new global security environment and emerging threats. That is why this, for me and for the government, is an important gathering. We need to fashion in this country a culture of a national security community, not just within Canberra, not just within the arms of the Australian federal government, but across all of those of you who are engaged in the national security enterprise in the states and territories as well. That is why, for me, also this initiative in the establishment of a National Security College here in Canberra is an important part of ensuring the evolution of an integrated, common conceptual approach to national security here and across the country. Looking back over the past decade, some of the most serious threats to nation states and to the functioning integrity of the international system at large have been from what practitioners would call non-traditional threats. The global financial crisis, which posed the most significant threat to the global economy since the Great Depression, is one example. The terrorist attacks of September 11 and 2001 on the United States and the violent jihadist movement that spread globally following that represents another. Furthermore, there are emerging non-traditional threats to our national security which we have not yet fully understood. Climate change, which has the potential to exacerbate or perhaps in time cause direct security challenges, represents another. Serious organised crime, where the enormous cost to society and enormous impacts are becoming more apparent. The common thread linking all these threats is the challenge they pose to traditional boundaries between foreign and domestic, between policy and operational, between government and the private sector. The conclusion we have to draw is that any sort of meaningful response must be multifaceted, must be highly coordinated. It simply cannot be the preserve of a single sole government agency or department. Today's highly interconnected, mobile, technology-dependent world has blurred the sorts of classical distinctions that once used to exist. It has also increased our vulnerability to disruption because the modern world is made up of many highly complex systems and systems within systems. Each of these must operate smoothly to guarantee the life that we expect. This has broadened the definition of potential national security threats. I don't believe for a moment that the traditional challenges of statecraft, managing the relations between states, shaping complex geostrategic systems, or fundamental issues of war and peace have simply gone away. They have not. These are enduring features of our national security. Indeed, the management of Australia's relations with the major powers, the prosecution of our global interests, our active shaping of the unfolding strategic environment in Asia and Asia in the Pacific, and the readiness and capabilities of the Australian Defence Force are more important to our national security and national prosperity than ever before. But these new non-traditional security challenges have taught us that we cannot afford to sit still when it comes to protecting Australia's sovereign interests. So I am particularly supportive of the theme of today's conference. Among these challenges and uncertainties that we face in the future, these continuing traditional threats must also continue to occupy our attention. Foremost of these are our national strategic interests, our continued territorial integrity, our border security, our political sovereignty, our cohesion, our prosperity, the interests of Australians at home and abroad, and regional stability and a rules-based order. These are fundamental and enduring objectives of any government's national security policy, and the first responsibility of any government is to maintain the national security of the country. Since the first National Security Statement, we've made progress towards achieving a more integrated whole-of-government approach to national security, an approach that moves seamlessly from domestic to international perspectives, from traditional to non-traditional threats, that is agile and responsive to today's dynamic and fast-moving security environment. We've created the position of a National Security Advisor, occupied by Duncan Lewis, supported by a dedicated group within the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. This position has developed and supported whole-of-government national security policy development and crisis response. It's helping to break down silos and stovepipes between departments and agencies and build a genuinely integrated national security community here in Canberra. In addition to bringing together different threads of the federal government, Duncan's job is also to work with state counterparts and, of course, with the private sector. So, as I reminded you all last year, if Duncan calls, it will be important. You need to answer the call and to respond to it, please. And it won't be just his standard invitation to golf. It goes beyond that to the core challenges of the day. For the first time ever this year, as part of the 2010-2011 budget, we brought together all of the national security-related proposals from relevant agencies under a single umbrella, the Coordinated National Security Budget. The budget commits us to an investment of $4.3 billion to strengthen our national security, including measures on border security, aviation security, counterterrorism, identity security, and military stabilisation operations. A coordinated approach to national security funding also allows us to weigh options and shift resources across and between portfolios to better achieve our national security priorities. And it provides a more accurate picture of our overall national security effort in the context of government spending. Perhaps more importantly, it forces agencies to see their own work in the broader national security context. This is helping to drive a change in the culture in agencies towards true whole-of-government thinking, because nothing drives cultural change more than a departmental budget. We have also taken a number of steps to build the national security community. Here at the ANU, we've established the National Security College, which will quickly become a central institution in our emerging approach towards national security policy and the evolution of this country's national security community and culture. The college will equip the next generation of leaders with the knowledge and skills needed to navigate our more complex national security environment. Over time, it will build up expertise across government, foster collaborative leadership, and replace any remaining silos with trusted networks of interaction within our national security community. We have established a National Intelligence Coordination Committee, chaired by the National Security Advisor, to ensure our national intelligence effort is effectively integrated and aligned with our national security priorities. We've taken steps to improve information sharing within the community. The National Security Information Environment Roadmap 2020 has now been publicly released. The roadmap provides for the first time a single strategy to address the barriers to information sharing, articulates a clear endpoint, and dismantles some outdated notions of information stovepipes and need to know. Last year, we also released the first National Security Science and Innovation Strategy. The strategy embraces the full breadth of national security threats, arising from rapid challenges to the technological capabilities of potential adversaries, and sets out ways to improve the application of science and innovation to strengthen our national security. We released also the Counterterrorism White Paper, which for the first time brought together the international and domestic elements of our counterterrorism policy into a single conceptual framework, a singular policy document. We are building the AFP's overseas network and using the AFP's expertise more in stabilisation operations throughout the region. We are creating a civilian response corps to enable the rapid deployment of Australian civilians into overseas disaster or conflict zones. We've created the Asia-Pacific Civil Military Centre of Excellence to improve our civil military capabilities and our ability to respond effectively to overseas conflicts and disasters. And finally, we're doing more to actively consult and engage stakeholders outside the traditional federal government national security community, such as state and territory governments, business, industry, and academia. I'd like to speak to you today about how these changes impact on you, the practitioners of national security. Today, this audience is broader than the one at the National Security Executive Leadership Forum that I addressed last year. This year, we have all Commonwealth agencies represented: Defence, Attorneys General, DFAT, the AFP, and of course other agencies as well. And like last year, we have representatives from state government agencies, though on this occasion you are here in greater numbers, and we welcome that. But this year, there are also leaders of the business community, academics and commentators present as well. This is an important evolution. As domestic and international events, impacts and influences become increasingly blurred in our complex, interconnected modern world, we need to look beyond the confines of government when considering national security and how we respond to national security challenges. Perhaps this is most clearly seen in the need to protect critical infrastructure from terrorism and ensure the continuity of essential services in the face of hazards. For our economic and social well-being in the modern world, we rely on key critical infrastructure: telecommunications networks, the electricity grid, financial systems, traffic systems, in the air, on the ground, and at sea. A disruption to any one of these systems would have a devastating impact on our lives and our livelihoods. Just look at the effect of one volcano in Iceland. The cost of air travel being grounded by that cloud of volcanic ash over Europe is estimated to be a loss of €1.5 billion for the airline industry alone, and a further €1 billion for the tourism sector in Europe. The follow-on impacts have been even greater. Over the past year, there have been some significant shifts in our thinking about critical infrastructure. For a number of years, the focus of governments around the country has been very much on protecting critical infrastructure from terrorist attack. But as I said in the National Security Statement, national security is broader than that. It's about protecting Australia and Australians from all hazards, be they man-made or natural. In line with this change in thinking, we are broadening the way in which we secure Australia's critical infrastructure. If we are to bolster our infrastructure against a hazard or disaster of any kind, we can no longer write policies or promote risk assessments aimed at protecting it against a specific hazard. Instead, we must enhance the resilience of our critical infrastructure, that is, the capacity for it to withstand and recover from all emergencies and disasters. This resilience must involve all sectors of our society, including all levels of government, of business, the non-government sector, and individuals. As you would know, all of the systems in Australia, all of our infrastructure, cross a number of boundaries. They cross also international boundaries, and they call into focus questions of sovereignty. They almost certainly cross state boundaries in Australia and raise questions of jurisdiction. But they also cross boundaries between the public and the private as well. Ownership and operation of the assets that lie at the base of these systems is neither wholly private nor wholly government. The continued operation of infrastructure must rely partly on government control and partly on industry-led standards, but is also dependent on an effective business-government partnership. Because of our reliance on critical infrastructure, the preservation of that infrastructure, its protection and resilience to all form of hazard becomes a matter, therefore, of national security. The questions for us all here today, therefore, are: how do we provide security for our nation's infrastructure? What is our role in providing that security? And how do we work together with all stakeholders to achieve that security? Answers to these questions are complex, but let me begin by raising a specific example. There are a couple of organisations that most of you in Canberra would know something of, but some in the business community might not know much about. They are the Cyber Security Operations Centre under the Defence Signals Directorate and the Computer Emergency Response Team Australia, or CERT, as it's known, in the Attorney General's Department. Both of these organisations are jam-packed full of computer boffins. And I say that as a term of respect. and one of their key tasks is to assist in the protection of Australia's computer networks. Earlier this year, we opened the Cyber Security Operations Centre in DSD, which was the first time we let the media into DSD. The centre brings together representatives from the relevant government agencies, including ASIO, the AFP, Attorney-Generals and, of course, Defence, to sit in one location and monitor and support our government networks to keep them safe, secure and operating. When fully operational, the centre will maintain a 24/7 watch on cyber activities that might threaten Australia's national security. It will provide the Australian Government with a better understanding of the cyber threat. It will coordinate responses to cyber security events of national importance. But government networks do not operate in a purely government environment. They also work closely with commercial telecommunications systems. So an important part of the centre's job is to engage with the telecommunications providers and open lines of communication about the challenges we face collectively. In the event of a threat or sophisticated attack against the non-government sector, the centre collaborates with industry through CERT Australia. CERT Australia provides cybersecurity information and advice to the Australian public and business community, particularly owners and operators of systems of national importance and critical infrastructure. To date, CERT and its predecessor, GovCERT, have briefed around 500 companies across Australia on sophisticated cyber threats to them. This reflects the fact that protecting national security means getting out there to industry and having frank conversations about the cyber threats we face. It means talking to telecommunications companies and finance companies about data and about how it is protected. It means working out where the shared vulnerabilities are and how we can work to overcome them. This example of cybersecurity illustrates the point that government and industry need to work with each other to provide the security and stability we need for our infrastructure. You here today are all stakeholders in that security, and you are all critical in the provision of that security. Cybersecurity is simply one of a number of examples. Cybersecurity, however, represents a core challenge for this nation in the period ahead. There are, however, some areas of national security where the government will always be the main player. National defence is the responsibility of the federal government. We published the first defence white paper in nearly a decade last year. It was the result of a rigorous process of assessing the military threats we might face and how we would have to deal with them. The result was a plan, Force 2030, to build by 2030 a defence force with more capabilities to meet the changing environment of our region into the future. And it also entailed a commitment to stable and predictable funding for the Department of Defence for the next 20 years. We are committed to ensuring that Australia has the ability to defend its territory. Of course, preparing defence forces is only part of the equation for securing our nation. The other side is to shape the regional and global environment so that it develops in ways favourable to us and our interests. It is for that reason that this government has been unashamedly active in global, international and regional affairs, making sure that our voice, Australia's voice, is heard as the world's major economies shape their response to the global financial crisis is for us a matter of continuing national security, as it is, for example, ensuring that we are purchasing the right ordnance or the right equipment for our defence force. Being active in the G20 over the past 2 years has helped to protect our core national economic interests. For a nation like Australia that lies at the western edge of the Pacific and the southeastern edge of Asia, the decades ahead will bring about a lot of change. China is rising. India is emerging. The United States continues to predominate. Other major powers in the region are seeking to secure their futures. This is a fluid environment. Arguably, the Asia-Pacific region represents the single most fluid security environment of any on the planet in the decade ahead. In this environment, the government's view is that in addition to strong relationships with key partners, we also need to help develop the right institutions that will help us manage any friction as power relativities change. This is why I continue to speak about the concept of an Asia-Pacific community. This is a straightforward concept of ensuring that the leaders of all the key nations in the region can get together periodically with a mandate to discuss all the challenges our nations face together, political, economic, environmental, or strategic. At present, we have no such body. Our view is that having one would be in our national interest, it would also be in the region's interests, and given the preponderance of this region in global affairs in this half-century which lies ahead, the global interest as well. We welcome recent statements from around the region that reflect a recognition of the need for our regional institutions to embrace wider membership and, prospectively, also the possibility of a wider mandate. Just as we need at home to build new partnerships to help us manage the complexities of the modern security environment, we need to do the same in the emerging complex international security space as well. To conclude, taking stock almost a year and a half on from the National Security Statement, I think we have gone some significant way towards creating a single and unified national security community here in Australia. We're on the way to building a national security community that is better equipped, coordinated and integrated, and that is able to respond more effectively to the full spectrum of national security threats. But there is much, much more to be done. And you, as the practitioners of national security, will know what that means in detail. The purpose of gatherings such as this, part of the mandate and the remit of the National Security in College, is to ensure that those practical ideas, practical suggestions, institutional reforms capable of removing the silos, capable of dismantling the stovepipes, are achieved on the ground. The test of that always occurs when an incident or event comes about. We know in retrospect from incidents which have occurred in the past where that coordination has not existed. Given that this is such a gathering of bright and sharp individuals, and given that you all come from cultures which are proud of their own institutional traditions from right across the community, please take this opportunity in the deliberations of this college, but more broadly across the national security community and forums such as this, to dig deep into areas where we can achieve that single, unified, coordinated response to the challenges which emerge in our national security environment in the future. If there is one lesson to emerge from where we have come from so far, it is the need also for continued evaluation, re-evaluation and improvement in the way in which we approach national security. Nothing remains the same. Those out there who would do us harm, who would do us ill, change the way in which they operate as well. Therefore, our responses need to be agile, they need to be mobile, they need to be capable of continued improvement and self-evaluation. We need to be mindful of emerging security threats. We need to be mindful of new ways to responding to those threats. And in particular, we need to be mindful that significant assets exist outside government which can make an important contribution to our nation's security. Businesses own or operate a significant portion of our critical infrastructure, and we have a great deal of knowledge and expertise in the domestic and international environment. Academics and think tanks can offer valuable insights as well, perspectives from outside the bubble of government that can inform better policy. Opinion and community leaders can do much to build social resilience and cohesion, important national security assets as well. It's important that, as leaders of the national security community, you all work together to secure the nation. And I congratulate you all on your participation in these courses in building a truly integrated national security community of Australia. I thank you.
Prime Minister, Acting Vice-Chancellor, Your Excellency the High Commissioner for New Zealand, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As the Director of the National Security College, it's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to thank the Prime Minister for his keynote address today, but more than that, to thank him for his ongoing support of the broader purposes and objectives of the National Security College. This conference this morning highlights what we hope will be defining characteristics of this college, bringing together areas of expertise from government and non-government, highlighting cutting-edge best practice research and its relevance to Australian national security policy, promoting collaborative leadership in the national security community in government, and building trusted networks of cooperation between that community and others outside it, working together to discern what are the forces of change and what are the elements of continuity to which national security policy should be responsive, and also working together to focus on issues of both immediate and enduring national security significance. Our particular purpose this morning is to pursue these priorities by focusing on a broad theme with very real ramifications. The changing capacity of sovereign countries, the opportunities and constraints of multilateralism, the implications of both for the international system and in particular for the Asia-Pacific region and for Australia's interests in it and in the wider world. Prime Minister, your address this morning has opened up a number of key issues in relation to that theme. And I'm delighted that we'll be pursuing them and others this morning. I'm very delighted that we've got 4 presenters that will take these issues that you've outlined forward in a way that will enable all of us to participate in defining best practice. I'm particularly delighted that we've got Professor Bill Tao, Professor John Ravenhill, Dennis Richardson, David Irvin to lead these presentations. I'm really delighted that we've got such a cross-section of the national security community in its widest sense to engage in an interactive discussion based on that. And I should mention, Prime Minister, that in addition to representatives from government, from business, from academia, think tanks, and the wider community, we have here today a significant number of what will be the first class of the National Security College Executive Development courses. These are EL2 officers from across the national security community that will be undertaking a 3-week course from the 7th to the 25th of June. This is their start. They will in some ways be pioneers, but they will be clearing a path that many, many more will follow. So can I again thank you very much for making the time available to join us today. Thank you very much for the substance of what you said, for the issues that you've opened up, and thank you again for the ongoing support for this initiative.